everyone and welcome! In this lesson we are going to apply the reselect library that we talked in the last lesson to the messages selector. Let's start by refactoring a bit the messages selector to extract some getters that we saw on the last lesson. Okay, so here we have a getter. We are retrieving the participants of the store. So let's see what type of getters we have here. Here we are retrieving the messages for the current thread, so let's define a getter that does that. The getter will have the following signature. It's going to be called getMessages for current thread. We are passing in the application state. Now, what we are going to do first is we are going to retrieve a reference to the current thread, and we are going to retrieve that from the state. So we are going to take the current thread ID from the UI state and we're going to use it to access the threads map, retrieving the current thread. After that, using the current thread, we can access the message IDs array. This is an array of numbers and each number is the ID of a given message. Now, using the array map operator, we are going to take the message ID and we are going to retrieve from the store the corresponding message. So for that we are going to access the store data messages map and pass it in the message ID. This will return us the message itself. So now at this point we should be returning a list of messages. Let's try this out. Let's annotate here the result of this function. We're going to say that this should return a message array. So now if you add here the return keyword, we should have a compiling program. So this confirms that indeed we are returning here a list of messages. Now we are going to take the getter and we are going to apply it here to retrieve the list of messages. We simply have to pass in here the state. So as you can see, the message IDs variable is now marked in gray. We can remove it. And if you notice, the current thread ID is only being used here to return an empty array, which we already do anyway. Because the way that we wrote this getter function, if the message IDs array is empty, we will be returning the empty array. So we don't need that special logic and we have now a more readable selector. Now let's continue our refactoring. Let's take a look at the mapping function. It's using the state and it's using the state to retrieve the current participants that are available on the store. So this also could be written under the form of a getter. Let's simply write it here the following way. We have here a getter function that takes in the state and returns the store data participants. So now we can use this function here. Let's slightly rewrite this mapping. So what we are receiving here is a message. And in order to map a message to a message view model, we need here the participants. So let's create here a local variable called participants. And we are going to populate it using the getParticipants getter. So you can see that these getters will be used to create the selector using reselect. Right now, let's finish up here this refactoring. We have here the participants. So let's say that instead of passing in here the state, we already have here a variable, which is the participants. Now, what is the type of this variable? This is a map, so this is how we define a map. We are going to put inside here the square brackets, we are going to put the key, which is a number, and here outside after the colon, we are going to put the type of the values of the map, which are participants. So right now, the participants are here defined. We are going to call here the mapping function. You're going to say that the message gets transformed by calling the map message to message view model. We're going to pass in here as the first argument the participants and as the second argument the message. So we have here a compiling program. Everything is working as expected. Now let's continue our refactoring so that we can apply our first memoized selector. Now this function here, we can extract it for readability, this mapping that we are doing here. Let's create here a mapping function that is map messages to message view model. So we have here, and we are going to take this statement and we are going to paste it in here. Now we are going to use this function here in the return clause of our messages selector. So the first argument that this takes in is the participants, and the second argument that it takes in is the messages. Now at this point we can see that this is the format that is required in order to apply create selector of reselect. We have here two getters, the getter for messages and the getter for participants, and we have a mapping function that takes the output of each of the getters and returns the output of the selector. So now let's use create selector to memorize the result of this computation. We are going to import create selector from reselect. So how do we use reselect? First, we are going to export a constant instead of a function, and we are going to assign it a value. The value is the output of the call to create selector. In here, we are going to pass in the getters that we want to use to extract values from the store. So the first getter is get participants, the second getter is get messages for current thread. And now the last argument is the combiner function. That is going to take the output of the two getters and it's going to produce the output of the selector. In this case, a list of message view models. So we are going to pass in the function that we created here, map messages to message view model. And we want to pass in a function reference and not call the function. So now let's summarize what the use of create selector has brought us as an advantage to our application. So if we render our application with the exact same list of participants and the exact same messages for the current thread, we're going to get the same result. So this computation, map messages to message view model, will only be executed if we change either the participants or the messages. If those two things are kept, then we won't re-render the UI. And under which situation is this useful? It's useful for the periodic refresh of messages from the server. So let's say that there aren't any new messages each 3 seconds. Then the UI will not be rendered because the output of this selector is exactly the same. The UI will only be re-rendered if there are new messages or new participants. So this means less UI re-renders and a more performant user interface. So this would already help us in the case where nothing has changed inside the store. No re-render would be triggered in that case. But if we only add one message, this still does not prevent that the whole list of messages will be re-rendered. So let's see how can we optimize that as well. It's coming right up in the next lesson.